There you hear the bongs of Big Ben. It's 4 o'clock here in Westminster. I'm Regini Vardhanathan, bringing you continuing coverage of today's budget. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has delivered what's likely to be the last budget before the general election, telling MPs his new policies would lead to long-term growth and permanent tax cuts. He said he wanted his budget to unleash people power. But the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, called it the last desperate act of a party that's failed. Well, let's have a look at some of the key announcements that we heard today. Well, let's start with tax. And the Chancellor has announced that national insurance will be cut by another 2 pence in the pound. He says the cut, which will begin next month, is worth £450 a year for the average worker. The earning threshold for child benefits also been raised to £60,000. That's up from £50,000. Meanwhile, the government's frozen the fuel duty again and kept the 5p cut in fuel duty on petrol and diesel, which was due to end later this month, for another year. The government also kept a freeze on alcohol duty, which is due to end in August. It will now continue until February next year. The Chancellor also announced a longer repayment period for people on benefits taking out emergency budgeting loans. There'll be an increase in the VAT threshold for small businesses from £85,000 to £90,000. Back to taxes, and there'll be a new tax on vaping products that'll come in October 2026, and the existing tax on tobacco will increase. The Chancellor says that's in order to maintain the financial incentive to choose vaping over smoking. A windfall tax on the profits of energy firms, which has been scheduled to end in March 2028, will now be extended a year until 2029. And the air passenger duty, which is a tax paid on flights, will go up for business class tickets. The non-dom tax regime for UK residents who have a permanent home overseas will be replaced with new rules from April 2025. Let's look at the bigger picture when it comes to the UK economy now. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, is predicting that the UK economy will grow by 0.8% this year and 1.9% next year. Remember, we're currently in a technical recession. Now, the UK's inflation rate's also forecast to fall below 2% target this year. But the underlying debt, excluding the Bank of England debt, is forecast to be 91.7% of GDP this year. That's forecast to rise to 92.8% next year. Well, there's a lot to chew over, of course, and we've tried to bring you up to date on the main headlines. But our political correspondent, Helen Capp, has more in this report.
Is this an election-winning budget, Chancellor?
As Jeremy Hunt posed for the last budget photo call before an election, he would have known that a lot was riding on the speech inside that red box. The economy has dipped into recession. The polls suggest that support for the Conservatives remains stubbornly low. Mr Hunt and the Tories have pinned their hopes on offering tax cuts.
Mr Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah. The big new measure, much publicised in advance, was a further cut of 2 pence in national insurance from April.
When combined with the autumn reductions, it means 27 million employees will get an average tax cut of £900 a year. 2 million self-employed will get a tax cut averaging £650. Changes that make our system simpler and fairer, and changes that grow our economy by rewarding work.
Future increases in spending were kept to a tight 1%, although Mr Hunt announced new money for the NHS. And he said the Household Support Fund to help the most vulnerable would continue for another 6 months. There was news for parents, increasing the maximum one parent can earn before a family starts to lose child benefit.
I confirm that from this April, the high-income child benefit charge threshold will be raised from £50,000 to £60,000. We will raise the top of the taper, at which it's withdrawn, to £80,000. That means no one earning under £60,000 will pay the charge, taking 170,000 families out of paying it altogether.
In a political as well as economic move, Jeremy Hunt took Labour's plans to change how wealthy foreign nationals pay tax and to extend a windfall levy on oil and gas companies.
That is money the party opposite planned to use for spending increases, but today a Conservative government makes a different choice. We use that revenue to help cut taxes on working families.
Sir Keir Starmer.
After this budget, debt and taxation levels will stay high and forecast growth low.
There we have it, the last desperate act of a party that has failed. Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years.
Sir Keir back to freeze on fuel duty and the national insurance cut, even though that will leave Labour having to find a new way to fund its own plans.
The harder they try with cynical games like this, the worse it will get for them, because the whole country can see exactly who they are. Fighting for themselves, politics not governing, party first, country second.
The Scottish National Party weren't impressed with the budget measures.
The Prime Minister might be under the impression that the cost of living crisis is easing, but that assessment will be a slap in the face for households across Scotland who are still facing the consequences of over a decade of Tory cuts and mismanagement of the economy.
The Liberal Democrats say the national insurance cut is a swindle.
The NI cut is not really going to make a huge difference to people. They are still going to be paying more in tax in the next tax year as a result of the planned tax rises that the government are not reversing, and that this small cut in national insurance is just a very, very small reduction in the amount of increased taxes that people are going to be paying.
I commend this statement to the House.
Now all the Chancellor can do is watch to see how his budget lands, outside the Commons, among the voters who will decide who delivers the next one. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.